No mai, haere mai. Inga reo, ina mana, inga waka, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. So, my name is Nick Smith and I'm the Vice-Chancellor of Te Herenga Waka, Aotearoa University of Wellington. And it's my great pleasure to open tonight's debate and welcome everybody here. The topic is education, and I think the role of education and that topic is probably more important for our country, I think, than it's ever been. We're at a time when technology presents both an enormous set of opportunities, but also a huge challenge in terms of how we digest and process information, and also the potential inequalities that can be inadvertently a result of that opportunity. We're at a time when our capacity to balance the needs of today with the needs of the future is increasingly ever more acute. But perhaps most alarmingly from my perspective, we're also at a time when we can struggle to have conversations about issues that don't result in often a very vocal minority retreating to the polarised extremes, each claiming they're on the high moral ground. And it's for this reason that I think it's really important that we have events like this, where we can bring evidence and scrutiny to the discussion and issues that our political leaders are going to be grappling with for the upcoming period. This university, Victoria University of Wellington, Te Herenga Waka, has a really special role to play in that exercise. As a university based in the capital city with a long track record of leading and hosting discussions on important topics that will define all our futures, we see this as our responsibility and we're very proud to host these discussions. But the key thing about any discussion is that it's an exchange, it's a debate, it's a challenge, and it's for this reason I want to thank all of our audience tonight for not only turning up, but in advance for energising this event. Important to that energy is going to be your participation through our online polling. And I hope you've already got your devices out and set up, and also that they're on silent. You'll see the screen link to the Mentimeter website. And the first question that we want people to answer, which I can already see, is going to be defining the university strategy for 2024 and beyond. But we're going to use that as questions throughout the event, and a number of these questions are also going to be put to our candidates. So listen to the prompts during the debate from our moderator, and the results will be displayed on the screens around you. But just as importantly, I also wanted to thank our candidates for taking part in tonight's debate. I had these in alphabetical, apolitical order, but we've had some late substitutions, and so now they're just in random order. But I'm going to start with Angela Roberts from the Labour Party. Minister Tinetti was not able to come tonight, but we have Angela, who I've described as a Renaissance politician, a secondary school teacher who has taught everything from economics to drama. We have Chris Bailey from ACT, who has had a career that seems longer than I've been alive. He was a police officer for 14 years and then trained as an English and music teacher before 22 years teaching students with special learning needs. We have Tiano Tuinoa from the Greens, spokesman for education and Māori development among other areas, and in Pacifica communities, Tiano is known for his work in the education sector and climate change advocacy. We have Penny Simmons from the National Party, who's a former chief executive of the Southern Institute of Technology and is widely credited with turning that tertiary institution around such that it was one of the exemplars in that space. And last, but by no means least, we have someone who will be known to many here in the city of Wellington, Andy Foster, former mayor of this city.
Country, well, that's good. That's good. We'll take that.
Not mayor of the country yet.
That'd be very super city.
And Wellington City Councillor. Unfortunately, Natalia Albert from the Opportunities Party is unwell and not able to join us tonight. But finally, I'd like to introduce our moderator for the debate, the man who is going to coalesce ideas, cajole our candidates, cut off people when they're going on for too long, but bring a sense of purpose and that energy. Mark Jennings, he's the co-editor of Newsroom and one of New Zealand's most respected journalists. Mark has worked in news since the 1970s, both here and in Australia. He co-founded Newsroom with Tim Murphy, and we're very grateful that he can join us tonight as the debate moderator. Can I have a round of applause for both our candidates and for our moderator?
Kia ora koutou, everyone. Thank you very much, Nick, and thank you to Victoria for supporting Newsroom. You've been in it from the start and we really appreciate that. I think Chris and myself are fighting to be the oldest person on the stage, but
Who's the youngest?
right. So tonight we're going to have a lively debate, and we're not going to stop interjections because they are part and parcel of a good debate. But I have told all the candidates that if anybody interjects too much, I'll be subtracting a little bit of time from them at the end. So there will be a little bit of a price to pay. Some public service announcements first. Many of you will be familiar with these, obviously. If the fire alarm sounds, then we need to evacuate the building to the nearest exit and gather on the Tim Beaglehole courtyard. If there's an earthquake, and this is something we don't have in Auckland, so this is new to me, we need to drop to the ground, get under cover and hold until the shaking stops. And if there is an emergency, please follow the guidance of the university staff. Now we are live streaming this tonight, and so we welcome all the viewers that are on the live stream. And as I said earlier, we're not going to be too strict, but we are going to time the opening addresses, and we're keeping those to 1 minute. So I'm going to start by asking each of the candidates to make an opening statement. It's 1 minute long, and the topic, if you like, is what does it take to make a great education system? And we're starting with Andy Foster.
Oh, well, it's the first time I'd actually heard the topic. So look, thank you all for coming out tonight. I'm not actually going to follow that particular topic. I got about 2 hours head start on this particular one, so I apologise on behalf of Taylor Arneil, who was supposed to be here to be speaking for this. Just by way of background, this is the university I went through. I did both my degrees here, and I also had the pleasure of teaching, but it was a long time ago. He's not as old as he looks, with Chris at Nayland College for a couple of years before a Labour government then persuaded me that I should get involved in politics, because I didn't entirely like the way that they were doing things. That was Roger Douglas and David Longy and co. And it's a Labour government that's persuaded me again to get back involved in politics, which wasn't really my intention. And it's because there are so many issues which we face in the country at the moment, things which are not going in the right direction, whether it's education, which of course we'll spend most of tonight on, whether it's the health system, law and order, and our economy. And we're very much focused on trying to get our economy right. And the one other message really is, I think there's going to be a change in government. It's just a matter of what that new government looks like. And we will be very happy to be working with National and ACT to provide some balance in the room. And that's really what we are standing for, to try and change the country, try and fix some of the things that are broken, and to give us the country that we really need. So thanks all for turning out, and thanks for showing your care.
Thank you, Andy. Next we have Angela, and Angela, it'd be good if you were able to stick to the topic and tell us what does make a great education system.
I didn't know what the topic was until they said it.
Okay, none of us did. Kia ora, and great question. And I think one thing that we've learned from COVID is what COVID did is highlighted the challenges in the system and what does make it great. And quite simply, we need adequate resourcing in the right places. We need evidence-informed policy, and we need to be really clear that we're striving for, in collaboration, and we need to be striving for removing the inequality of access, to making sure that our teachers are really well trained and have great professional development and collaborative opportunities, and we need to make it affordable and accessible, and it needs more in order to keep us at the best, as the best public education system in the world.
Thank you, Angela. Next we're going to have Chris.
Thanks, Mark, and it's great to see so many people here. 40 years ago, I was in my second year at university, and right here, well, not right here because this building wasn't here.
No, it wasn't.
And 3 years ago, I was teaching in a school, and the reason I'm pretty much sitting up here now is because I wasn't happy with the way the education of all of New Zealand was going. I think we need to, there's so many issues at the moment, I won't list them now, I'm sure we'll be covering them over the next hour. But we need, the way ACT sees it and the way I see it, we need choice. We need to be able to get buy-in from the kids, from staff, from teachers. Teaching is the best job in the world, and it should be. But so many teachers I've spoken to recently in the last couple of years are just unhappy. They just go to work and they just do the job. They don't, haven't got the spark that a good teacher really needs to improve the lives of those kids. So a good future. Certainly, we need a happy workforce and kids that want to go to school.
Thank you, Chris. Penny.
Thank you. Kia ora tātou, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. This election is all about the economy. Our wonderful little country is in $100 million worth of debt. That's $100 billion worth of debt. That's $11 billion that has to be spent each year servicing that debt. And you might say, well, what's the impact on education? That $11 billion of servicing annually is the same amount that we spend in total on our primary and our secondary schools. So it shows you the opportunity cost of having that level of debt. It also impacts on our tertiary institutions, just as it impacts on each one of us. The cost of running a tertiary institution is much higher now because of the rate of inflation. So the economy absolutely impacts on what sort of tertiary education sector that we are going to have. And so it's been heartbreaking for me to watch the waste of money, the wasteful spending that has occurred, having run a tertiary institution for 23 years, being so careful with expenditure to see wasteful money that should have been spent on frontline education is one of the reasons I'm here tonight.
Thank you, Penny. But look, judging from what the audience have voted, I would say that probably Angela's vision is leading the way there.
We've got more to go.
Oh, sorry.
It's me out here on the left.
Oh. Sorry.
There's always a gag about where we sit.
I'm like the lone endangered kiriru in the wilderness that needs to be protected.
I'm going to give you extra time for that.
Yeah. Oh, well, kia ora everyone. First of all, I'm not Tamitha Paul, so well done if you got that. Number two, I'm not her dad. Number three, my oldest child, who is about the same age as Tamitha, was here during Tamitha's student presidency. She was an excellent student president of this fine university, and she will be a great member of Parliament for Wellington Central. So 2 ticks for Tamitha. Also, I'd like to be a big shout out to all the student associations that put into this People's Inquiry into Student Wellbeing. What it showed to us in the Greens that our tertiary institutions, they need to be funded as a public good. That's what they need to be done. We also need to deal with student poverty, because what we found in this inquiry was that 2/3 of students experience poverty and hardship. And that's why at this election, the Greens are pushing for an income guarantee, so a student allowance of at least $385, because when you're broke and hungry, you don't study well, or this does not become an option for you. We also need to have rental controls, because that is a massive issue for students as well, because when we fill our tertiary institutions with students, that's what makes these places vibrant. Neoliberalism is a big failure. We need to do better.
Thank you, Tiano. So just going back to that question that's sitting on your screens there, engaged citizens, the ability to understand, communicate and collaborate across diverse society. It's interesting that that's come out on top. The one I picked has come out 5th. That was innovators with the ability to harness opportunities in emerging technologies. So it's already, I've made the first mistake and now I've made the second mistake. Right. The topic of funding came up, and I want to examine that first. I think it is the really big topic that's sitting here. Everybody basically has alluded to it. So if we look at what the current situation is, the universities have argued that the funding model has forced them to compete for students, spending up large on marketing, radio, television, even the back of buses. So do you agree that the funding model has forced our universities to compete? I'm going to ask both Angela and Penny this question. We'll start with you, Angela.
I always go first. Yeah, I think when you've seen this government has committed not just to a sort of a CPI increase, but some additional funding to help you to cling on while there is a review, because it is, I understand that, but we need to review the model. When we've had a complete reliance haphazardly on, we need more money, so let's just bring in more international students. We love our international students, but it needs to be deliberate. It needs to be thoughtful, and we need to make sure that the funding model is appropriate. And I don't think the government should be stepping away from its obligation to providing this massive public good that is educating our population in tertiary settings. So I think we've got a huge opportunity to make sure that funding review reveals the problems and makes a significant is ambitious and makes structural changes. It's not just about topping up. It's not because, like you say, topping up isn't enough. It isn't just about going, we'll just pick a number of international students out of the year and add that income. We need to be very clear about how we structure the funding and where that funding comes
for 6
from.
years, Angela.
And so
You've been in government 6 years.
Okay, well let's just hear Angela first as to why her government's done nothing in 6 years.
Okay, and I know this sounds like excuses, but before this gig, I was in the education sector, and I know the impact that COVID had on teachers, on students, on institutions. It was huge, and I know that shadow of COVID still is in the system today. And I'm not saying, we didn't do anything for 6 years but we had structural changes to make across the system. We have reformed vocational education, much to Penny's delight. And because we see the vision of a national, coherent vocational system, and we've looked at ECE, we've had some significant shifts in our schooling models around NCA and the curriculum, and it has been slowed down. It is not fast enough, you're right, and we've got more work to do, but we're up for it.
Okay, thank you. Penny?
So as someone who was dealing with the amount of funding we had for the last 23 years, I would love to be in a position to say we can put lots more funding into tertiary education. But the reality is that we have $100 billion worth of debt. And we have $11 billion that will go out of this country every year.
We've heard that before, Penny.
So I think if you want to talk about the tax cuts, we do think that when people are in a cost of living crisis, they do deserve to keep more of their own money. It's their money and they deserve to keep more of that. So the funding, look, we have to face the reality that we're not going to have a lot of money to put into things, but what we can do is shift money from back office to front, and so we have seen 1,200 more bureaucrats in the Ministry of Education. We have seen more bureaucrats in the Tertiary Education Commission, and we need to be moving that money to the front line of our universities and our polytechs. We saw $200 million spent on amalgamating the polytechnics to make them worse. So there has been money spent, education money spent, that should have gone to the front line.
Thank you, Penny. Chris, do you believe the university should be competing for students?
I think the funding needs reform, which it'll be really great once that review comes through. But Penny is actually absolutely right. We're in such a dire straits in our whole economy that we just can't afford. Just the money tree that the Greens talk about doesn't exist.
It doesn't.
And we need just by taxing wealthy people will not cover everything that they want to cover. So we really it certainly needs a reform and make it fairer. Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. Tiano, your response to that?
I've got a response to a couple of things.
Yep.
First of all, we are the only country in the OECD which doesn't have a capital gains tax, a wealth tax or stamp duty, or a combination of all three. So the richest 311 families in this country have the cumulative wealth of $85 billion. That is more than the poorest 2.5 million people in this country. It is more than timely for a wealth tax.
The day this country starts punishing
I wanna respond
people
to the
for being successful is a sad day.
Nobody minds people being successful.
And we can have all these things if we have a fairer tax system. And I just wanted to respond to some of the earlier questions, and I want to acknowledge the work of the Tertiary Education Union here, the Students' Association, who put the pressure on the government to give that extra $128 million, but noting that wasn't new money, it was old money. So we need to make sure that we fund our tertiary institutions as a public good, and we can do that by supporting our students, by having an income guarantee so they're not broke and hungry, because who wants to come to a tertiary institution if you're going to be broke and hungry? Anybody that's been poor will tell you, being poor sucks.
Okay,
Moved on.
we can have a debate on poverty as well, but I think we need to just come back a wee bit to education. Andy, do you support a funding review?
Yeah, look, I think the model's clearly broken, and I think the point that's been made that during COVID the model broke, and what you saw there is a lot of people, domestic students, decided that actually it was better with low unemployment, or whatever they needed to do financially was to go. It's still working. Was to go and get a job, and so you lost a lot of students there, and of course that's students off the bottom line, if you like, for a model which relies on bums on seats. And then of course the international students who couldn't come, and so we saw that international student income also for the universities whittling away. So that's at the core of the problem, and there are 3 universities, I think this is one of those 3 universities which particularly suffered from that. So that model doesn't work. Does the model of competition between our universities work? No. It's not a particularly smart thing to be spending public money. I mean, these are people who, by and large, they want to study at a university. Why are we marketing to those people? They're going to come to one of the universities in New Zealand. From a government point of view, it doesn't matter which one. So why are we spending money competing against ourselves? And we see that in a lot of places around New Zealand where we compete against ourselves rather than actually, we need to grow the pie. And so if we're going to give more money to everybody, the thing we actually have to do is to grow the pie. And sometimes some of the initiatives that we're being talked about here won't grow the pie, they might even shrink the pie. And that's what we can't afford to do. So economic growth is absolutely an essential part of this, but the funding model for universities we think needs review because we think it is not working. And the other part of that funding model too, of course, is we need to make sure we support the areas of excellence. So one of the things, Nick, I look at this and I know you're doing some really hard work here, but the effect, for example, on the School of Music is pretty devastating. And I know it's not the only part of the institution here. Those are areas of excellence which we can't really afford to lose. And the other part is the research area, which you also need to support. So I think an overall strategic approach to tertiary education university funding is really, really important. I'm not sure we've got that right at the moment.
Thank you. So I want to do a quick fire round. So it's a yes or no answer, mainly.
No politics.
Right.
Yes or no.
New Zealand has 8 universities.
Yes or no, or ramble.
New Zealand has 8 universities. Is this too many for a country of 5 million people? Yes or no? Starting with you, Andy.
Probably.
Chris?
Off the top of my head, I would say no. It's worked well up till now.
Denny?
No, it's about the same as Australia has in ratios of population.
Angela?
Yeah, it seems about right. They've got to be coherent, though, about what they deliver nationwide strategically.
Tiano?
No.
No. Okay, agreement on that, pretty much. Okay, I want to go to the next topic about, and Tiano's already spoken at length about this, but I want to look at student costs because we do it, I think everybody in this room acknowledges that it is pretty hard for students at the moment. And I wanted to use the example of Lily. She's 25 years old and she's been working for the past few years and wants to go back to university in 2024 to do her master's degree. She doesn't qualify for student allowance, and the maximum she can borrow, and I stress the word borrow, for living costs under the student loan scheme is $302 a week. Now that's barely, I'm told, barely enough to cover a one bedroom in a cold Aotearoa Valley flat. Sounds bad. So, Angela, if we want students like Lily to come back to university, is the financial support available attractive enough?
Obviously, the student allowance issue is significant, but there's more than one way to help support students, and we've done that by committing to cheaper public transport, to raising, I know that's a terrible thing, and how much you can borrow, the training incentive allowance, some of your fees being free, requiring warmer dry homes from landlords. Building 12,000 public houses means that we've got a slight improvement in housing supply, so hopefully things will become more affordable with regards to rent. We've raised the minimum wage by $7 since we've been in government, and we have committed to increasing that to a living wage, and we have also committed to removing the youth rates. So when you do go out and work, you are getting paid fairly. So it is a combination of things. I think absolutely student allowances, I think we need to do more work on how to make that possible. Not just student debt, but student allowances. I think we do need to keep working hard on making that possible. But it's alongside all of those other things. There's no point in having a student allowance if your rent's $400 and you are sick because of the place that you have to live in. So I think we have to attend to all of those needs. It's important.
Thank you. Tiano, the Greens are, as you alluded to, promising students a universal payment of $385 a week. How did you arrive at that figure?
Well, we've got a whole suite of policies, and if you go onto greens.org.nz, you can check them all out. But on top of our income guarantee, we're also pushing for, we've got a pledge for renters as well, because rental controls will help to get that issue sorted. Because when we put out that pledge, our pledge to renters, people sent in photos of some of their rental properties. I saw one where someone had a mushroom growing in the middle of their room, broken windows, all of this sort of stuff. We have normalised student poverty in this country, and it is not acceptable. It is not acceptable that people should be living in poverty and hardship like that. That's why we need to have rental controls.
Okay.
So the wealth tax component, it's around about, we've also got other measures in there about increasing the corporate tax rate from 28% back to 33% as well, which is where it was before the global financial crisis as well. Also a bit there on the trust tax, just in case people try to move assets around. And if you go to our site, we've actually got a tax calculator where you can chuck your details in and see how much of it impacts you. But we are targeting the mega wealthy in this country.
Penny.
Yeah, can I just say, targeting the mega wealthy, the latest country that put in a wealth tax, Norway, put one in at 1.1%, which is less than half what the Greens want to put in. They had such an outflow of money and people, their tax take is now lower.
And
so
they
that's
went to
less
Switzerland,
money.
which has got a different,
so
which has got a capital
don't
gains
think that that's going to be the silver bullet. So look...
Penny, could I just ask you a question here? That National says it wants international students coming here and paying higher fees to keep costs down for domestic students. But haven't the universities got big deficits, and this is not a reliable income stream, is it?
Well, I think international students are important for a range of reasons. Yes, they bring in financial benefit, but they also are significant in terms of our own domestic students being able to build those relationships with people from other countries. Our tertiary students are going into a global workforce. They need to understand different ethnicities, different backgrounds, and for later, it's really important for us to have those relationships of people in other countries that know New Zealand intimately and think well of New Zealand. So they're really important not just for the financial contribution, they also bring a lot into our communities in terms of part-time employment, going into areas of skill shortage, tourism, hospitality, caring. So,
But you can't rely on them to solve a funding crisis, can you?
well, they have been part of the financial contribution to our tertiary sector for many years now, probably over 2 decades, and I think they will continue to be. That's probably the same for most OECD countries. So if we are trying to make up the difference of international students, then that will be a huge amount of money that would have to be invested from the government.
Until the next round of COVID. But, okay, so Chris, do you support Penny in this view that international students can make up the deficit?
I think it certainly helps, and certainly not just for universities either. For secondary schools, I know have had a marked effect on how they run as well. I think it's just, I mean, being a student is tough, and it always has been, and it shouldn't be as tough as it is, but it always has been. My personal experience, I worked for 2 years out of school and then saved enough money to come here to this university and carried on working part-time jobs. But you know, I mean, yell all you want, but this is just the truth. And the false economy that the Greens and Labor talk about, they talk about raise the minimum wage. The minimum wage went up 44% in 5 years, while productivity went up 7%.
Put food on people's
I
tables.
hope people do economics. 44% increase and 7% productivity. That's just unsustainable for businesses.
Access money, vote green.
We must have the businesses doing well, everyone making a profit. Now, it's a dirty word, Tiana, I know. Making a profit so that they can pay staff more and improve conditions. Otherwise, they won't. That's another myth, but that obviously that is perpetuating. But we need a strong, growing economy if we're going to make it better for students.
It's not.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Andy, New Zealand First is a party of old people. What are they going to do? What are they going to do to help students?
Yeah, young fella.
Oh, I was going to say, except for me. No, Taylor, who was going to be here, I think is in his early 20s. So he's our candidate for Wellington Central. So I don't think that's entirely accurate, Mark. So what's the question after the insult?
Well, what are you going to do to help students with the cost of living?
Yeah, look, we think it's important to have a student allowance, universal student allowance, and it shouldn't also, I know your example was over 25, but under 25, that shouldn't be linked to your parents' income. Particularly, you know, it starts disappearing around, $70,000 or something like that. We think, and for a lot of people, you might not actually want to live with your parents at that stage, and so it's unfair to penalise people for that either. So we think a universal student allowance is important. The other thing we think is important in terms of student loans is supporting the payback of those student loans. Because what we want is if we invest in people, we want those people to be investing back in our country. Now, look, it's really good to be able to go overseas, spend a bit of time there, but we'd kind of like you back. And that means how about we help pay off those student loans? If you invest that time, those skills that you've developed back in New Zealand, why shouldn't we help you to pay off those student loans? So those are the two big aspirations we've got there. But I would just like to make one other comment around our economic performance, because that's sort of come up and different people have got completely different views of it. We had the worst current account deficit in the OECD in the last year, the worst. And it wasn't close. We were a long way behind. And that is effectively we are borrowing our living standards off somebody else who at the moment is willing to lend to us. And they charge interest for that. And anybody who has got a debt, whether it doesn't matter whether it's a mortgage or whatever, will know if you didn't have that debt, you didn't have to pay that interest, you kind of feel like you had a lot more money in your back pocket. But when you do have to pay that, and as I think Penny said, you know, if we're paying as much in interest as we are spending on the primary and secondary sector, primary and secondary education sector, it'd be really nice if we weren't doing that. So we've got to fix those things. If we have a good economy, we're much more likely to be able to afford all the quality public services we want. That includes education, includes health, all of those things, but we must have the economy working too.
Okay, thank you, Andy. I want to have another round, quickfire round, please. The first year's fees-free policy, yes or no, Andy? Continuing.
Yeah, we're not convinced that it is effective, and if we were going to do anything, though, the other thing I would say is that it's probably more likely to be beneficial to be the third year rather than the first year.
Thank you. Chris?
We're a no. We don't think the fees-free targeted has worked for the very people that it was designed for, and we think the money could be better spent elsewhere.
We're a yes. We just think the cost of living crisis is such that it's just not the right time to be changing that.
Angela?
Yes, absolutely. This isn't about who can afford it, it's about reducing the burden for a public good.
How about you let us have a fee that actually covers the real costs?
Oh, yeah, good point.
Tiano?
Yes, plus more.
Yes, plus more.
Money.
Money tree.
That tree's getting bigger and bigger.
Can I just comment on
Yeah.
something that, because it kind of drifted that way and I didn't get to put my little 10 cents in, and that was around the funding model we were talking about, international students.
Yes.
What COVID exposed was the fundamental flaw in that model, that we treat international students as the cash cow. And that came crashing down when the borders closed. And so when Angela does her review, that needs to be sorted out, or whoever does the review, that needs to be sorted out, that needs to be factored in. We actually need to be supporting international students as well, because those pressures for people when they come from overseas, we need to have mental health services, we need to have all of those types of services when people come here, and we need to make sure that they come here in a good way and that they are supported in the best way possible.
Thank you. I want to move now to access. We know that Māori and Pacifica are less likely to leave school with university entrance. In 2022, 17.8% of Māori and 20.7% of Pacifica students left school without UE. That compares to 41.7% of Pākehā students. The data also shows us that when they go on, Māori and Pacifica students go on to tertiary education, less of them complete that. I'd like to know from you each what you're going to change to ensure that Pacifica and Māori have an equal chance of completing high school and the option of going on to further studies. Let's start with you, Tiana.
Tēnā koe mō tērā pātai e hoa. Kia ora, someone that is, I'm both Māori and Pacifica, but it's a very personal issue for me as well. We need to make sure that we have culturally appropriate solutions for our Māori and Pacifica students, making sure that there are services both here in the universities as well. And I remember as a much younger person coming up here and spending some time over at the marae, so making sure that's there as well. But we've got to fundamentally reform the way that we deal with student poverty. So the way that we're doing that is an income guarantee of $385, making sure that we have rental controls, because many of our whānau, they're renting. There's 1.4 million renters, and many of them are Māori and Pacifica. So if you can make sure that you take care of the whānau, and they're in houses that are warm and healthy, then that makes it easier for them to come to places like this. And I know that from personal experience.
Angela, what are you going to do to get the access rate up?
So I think there's two big pieces. One is, having been a secondary school teacher for a very long time, that intersectionality for our Māori and Pacifica kids and poverty is significant, and we know from the research about how that impacts on their achievement. So there's two bits. We do need to deal with poverty. We need to make sure that wages are good and we can put food on the table and we have warm, dry homes and we make it possible for parents to actually spend time at home with their children so they can support their learning. And when life's here, you don't have a conversation about, I don't know, philosophy, right? It's like, who's taking your little sister to school and which person's taking a day off work because somebody's sick. So we need to tackle that poverty issue. And the second bit, we do need to make sure that our Māori and Pasifika students see themselves in our schools. We have a lot to learn from our wānanga, from our kura iwi and kura kaupapa, and we have delivered on things like the governance model for wānanga and better support, not enough, but more support for kura. And I think mainstream education still has a lot to learn about how we include te ao Māori and mataranga Māori in our system, so these kids are themselves and can succeed. So we feed them, we give them a warm dry home, we look up to their whānau.
So Penny, we've heard from the two candidates on the left of you there that it's really a socio-economic problem that's holding students back, Pasifika and Māori students. Do you agree with that?
I think it's about choice, and I think it's a shame things like the charter schools were taken away because that gave choice with the charter schools. We've got we need to have PTEs, we need to have polytechnics, we need to have wānanga, where Māori and Pasifika students might feel more comfortable first in smaller institutions before going. And so, look, we just have to have a range of choice so that there are pathways that those that want to go straight through into a university can, but those who want to take a different pathway through a PTE, through a polytechnic, through the wānanga. So it's just having a range of choice.
Chris, the word charter schools came up there, something that's close to ACT's heart.
No, absolutely, and the two points here. I quite agree with Angela. We need to build the economy, and she had just said it. We've got to have a strong economy so that we can pay good wages and all of that. So I absolutely agree. And the other thing was the charter partnership schools, which were so good for Māori and Pasifika, and it was taken away by the Labour government in 2017. And Angela will say it's because of the civil rights movement in 1960. I've heard it a couple of times before, but it just means she hasn't been to visit them, hasn't seen the work that these kids are doing is absolutely fantastic. And a good start in a situation like that will lead through to secondary and then through to universities and tertiary study.
I'm just going to give Angela a quick right of reply on that.
Did I look a little bit agitated about it? I do get very, very animated about this. I've been duking it out with David Seymour for a decade. And because previous role I was a union thug, I think is the affectionate term some people use for me, when I was the president of the PPTA. And some things are really clear. There is nothing I ever saw in a charter school that isn't already to be found in our public system. That's the first thing.
It's just not true.
Especially, except for one thing, I will grant, and I'll tell you that in a minute, especially given the significant additional resourcing that they had.
To set
now,
up.
the second thing, to set up capital. Wouldn't we all love some of that? But the only difference is that a charter school can make a decision to not choose a student. They can send a student away if they don't comply with the high standards of the charter school, and they don't have to bother if that kid never ends up in another school. The public system, quite rightly, has an obligation to look after our most vulnerable
How often did that happen?
Charter schools never did that.
How often did that happen?
Now,
Never.
the other thing is, he is correct. I had this conversation with Sir Ian Taylor the other day when he said about ideology in charter schools. I said, the evidence is clear, and we know where charter schools started. They started in the south of the United States of America in a response to integration. This was about people not wanting to have their children in a particular school. This was about parental choice.
Willie
but
Jackson
not
owned
for
one.
Every
Yeah, Willie
parent.
owns one.
Willie owned one.
So I had a conversation with that urban iwi authority about whether or not they should be backing the kura down the road, or whether they should have another think about their resources. And what they did do was get involved with their attendance service and back to their kura. We need to back our public education system.
Thank you, Angela. Andy, your views on this?
Yeah, well, essentially, there are two parts to that question. The first part of them is how do you get young people through the school in the first place to get to a place where they're actually able to enter university. So that's the first part of the question. And the second part of the question is what do you do to make the university attractive and accessible? And I just thought it was worth having reading you some numbers there from the Ministry of Education pilot in 2022 on NCEA. And poverty absolutely is a really key determinant because all students, reading 64%, lowest decile 24%. In writing, 34%, 2%. And in maths, 56%, 10%. So there's a massive difference. And those first numbers were the averages. The others are the lowest decile. So there's a massive difference in terms of poverty and where people come from. So that we absolutely do need to support people who are in difficult learning environments. Poverty is clearly a major issue. For Maori and Pacifica, it's worse than it is for the average.
Yep. Okay, Andy, but what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? We can go on with the figures, but we need to know what you're going to do about it.
The point there is I'm agreeing with the speakers on the left that poverty is a real issue which we need to deal with. How long do you want me to talk about poverty and how you do
No,
it?
I want to know what you're going to do.
So that is a major issue. I think you've spent the wealth tax about 6 or 7 times over. That's one of your fundamental problems.
You're going to talk about the problem, you're going to give us a solution.
So the other part of it is once you get people to university level, and one of the things which we have been always very, very keen on is what we call the First in Family scheme. And that will be if you come from a family which simply has not got people who've got into university, you haven't had that model to aspire to, you give people a scholarship, you give them the support to be able to get them into university and support them through the university. You pay the fees to allow them to do that. And that helps people who are coming from backgrounds which are usually going to be really challenged backgrounds economically or whatever it might be to get into university and better get through university. And the final point I wanted to make is it's not just those pupils who come from poverty situations, but it's also, I think our NCA system doesn't work for a lot of people who have particular learning needs, and that's something which I think we do need to support, and we need more people more support wrapped around those people. I'm thinking of, for example, autism. I'm thinking of those kind of situations where the learning model, the tuition model, the testing model, and you've got to pass those tests to get into university, doesn't work. And that they may be really bright young people, but they can't get through those tests because they don't work for them.
Thank you, Andy. I want to just go to another quick-fire question here. It's an easy one. Should Te Reo Māori be compulsory in school? Starting with you, Andy.
No, but we should certainly be encouraging it very, very strongly. We certainly need to be training more teachers. We need to be training more teachers so that there is more available. So it's a very, very important part of the educational curriculum.
Chris?
Yeah, we agree.
No, but it should be up to an individual principal school board to decide that.
No, same reason. It should be up to individual schools.
Angela?
Encourage, support, have the teaching workforce really ready to go, and then compulsory? Well, of course.
Tino pai tēnei whakaaro ki au e hoa. But if I could just quickly respond, because it kind of drifted off the last one. We were focusing on Māori and Pacifica. And what I would say to all the education leaders, all the tertiary education leaders in this house, is to walk with our people, to deepen those relationships with iwi, hapu and whānau, walk with our Pacifica communities, deepen those relationships. And I know you guys are doing that, but we need to deepen those relationships so we can make those connections with those communities and create those pathways for our Māori and Pacifica communities and for all of our diverse communities into institutions like this. It's so important, that commitment. It has to be more than just words on a bit of paper. You have to feel it. And I would ask and invite everybody here to think about that and to take that on board.
Thank you. We're going really well. We're really cracking through these topics. To the next one. The Tertiary Education Commission has done some research looking into the future, and it's discovered that the career aspirations of 17 to 13-year-olds, they found that the top choice for boys and girls was sports person. 17% picked it, well ahead of the next option. I mean, this might be good for the All Blacks, but it's not going to help us find a cure for cancer or deal with climate change. So I'm going to ask you each 2 questions. First is, what did you want to be when you were 7? Secondly, what can we do to make today's kids look beyond the football field, the netball court, etc., and aspire to be future scientists and environmental engineers, for instance? Right, we're going to start with you, Andy.
I wanted to play football professionally. So I'm fitting the model there. But look, I think the key thing is we've got to make all the different career options, things that are going to make a huge difference to our society going forward. We've got to make them interesting and attractive. I mean, when you are that age, you don't actually know that half of these things even exist. So the first thing you've got to do is you've got to actually let our young people know that those career options exist. And there is, I mean, how many different ways can we do that? You know, you can go and take children to visit some of the places that, you know, scientific education. I mean, you know, go around the Mulligan Institute around the corner, for example, you know, if you want to get them interested in science. There's a heap of different things that we can expose our young people to if we want to get them inspired by those kind of things. And look at what we put on television as well, you know, or in any of those media that are available to children. You know, put those things there, showcase them and say these things are interesting, these things are stimulating. And also, you know, okay, the All Blacks are our heroes, but there are a heap of other heroes as well. You know, who the young scientists who won the science, the Prime Minister's Science Awards. I mean, the young woman who won that, absolutely awesome.
We don't make them heroes, do we?
That's my point. We don't make them heroes, and we should be making them heroes. If we made them heroes, people look at them and go, wow, that is cool. I would like to be like them when I grow up, rather than just seeing the All Blacks who I want to grow up and look like.
Chris, did you, when you were 7, did you want to be a publican?
Trumpet player.
Chris owns Nelson's Best Pub, by the way.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, it is great. Actually,
Chet Baker.
I did actually start playing the trumpet when I was 7 years old, so I was probably aspiring to do something along those lines. But I think at 7, you really just need to expose to make sure kids have the ability to achieve what they want to do. You know, by reading, writing, experiencing all the things that Andy just spoke about. I just know that when I was 14, I knew that I wanted to be a teacher, and I went home. I think it was an influence of some good teachers, and I thought they were really cool people. That's what I want to do. So. Yeah, I think kids can be influenced with good role models.
Penny, what's your view?
Well, at 7 I wanted to play hockey for New Zealand, so most young kids do want to play top sport. And then I went on to do a science degree, so we've got to expose children to science, to the STEM subjects essentially, and how those STEM subjects are such an integral part of our careers and our economy. Agri-tech is such a big thing for us, and we should be world leaders in that. And, well, yeah, the humanities are important, but actually we do need a lot more STEM graduates. So we have to face that reality, and we need to allow our young people to see that they have important career outcomes.
Angela, I'm picking you would have wanted to be a netballer.
Oh my goodness.
Really?
The Silver Ferns would have been horrified. Anywhere other than on the sideline cheering. I always wanted to be an actor. And I've kind of come full circle, I suspect, in my current job.
I've seen your performance.
Yeah. So, you know, I ended up teaching economics and theatre, and I guess that combination would be called politics. But I guess we're seeing some significant work of bringing people into classrooms. I know there's some great projects, whether it's as industries like, so when you go to primary production, they're understanding if they want people to go into farming, that actually they need to bring those farmers into classrooms, and there's some great work going on. But actually, and you talk about our heroes, actually we need more of those heroes to become teachers. Because when you are confident, and I know this as a fact, when you are confident as a teacher, you're excited about the subject that you're teaching because you know it and you're passionate about it. That is where a kid makes a connection, whether it's philosophy or history or science or drama or whatever it might be. So we need to encourage more of our heroes from right across the curriculum into our classrooms as experts to excite and inspire our young people, whether it's little kids right through to, as they're making decisions about university or work. I think that's a challenge for industry. I've said to Fonterra, put up some great teaching scholarships. So for me, I think that would really help.
I like that answer.
Tiano?
When I was 7, I wanted to be a librarian. I really like books. I still like books, big books, red books, long books. So I used to spend a lot of time in the library, and I just think when I was growing up, going to like secondhand bookshops or libraries, they were like magic places where you could, pick up a book and disappear and go somewhere and that kind of thing. And I just really liked how the librarians would just kind of organise all these different adventures, and I would kind of try to figure out how they would organise things. And I would often, as I became a more competent reader, I would find authors that I'd like, and I'd just go through all of them as well. So if there's any Ursula Le Guin fans out there, I'm one of them. Yeah.
Thank you. I'd just like to go back to the question about Te Reo Māori in schools. We were split up here, but 82% of you thought it should be compulsory. I think that's a really interesting response. Another... Sorry?
Hi.
It is.
I realise it.
Right, we're going to do another quickfire round here quickly. Should first-year university students be required to enrol in a paper about climate change? Starting with you, Tiano.
Oh my gosh, I feel the pressure. I think it's a good idea. Yeah, no, for sure. I think it definitely it's an idea that has merits. But we actually need to start at school before they get here, right? And there's also another piece in there, I think, around civics education. Because when I went to school, we didn't have misinformation and disinformation, and social media wasn't a thing where people could get caught by the algorithms, and down a rabbit hole you go, and then next thing you know, you've got even politicians being climate change deniers and so on and so forth. So I would support civics education within our kura, within our schools.
I think that's a yes, isn't it?
Sorry for the long answer.
That was a quick fire answer.
There's lots of things we need to do.
Angela, yes or no on climate change paper?
I think that's really interesting, because if you're going to have a different lens across climate change, whichever part of the university you're learning in. And when you look at something like the Sustainable Development Goals, I think there's potential for there to be a component of climate change to be a part of any degree. And of course the humanities are going to consider the issues differently from science, or whether it's physics or whatever. So that's the first thing. Secondly, I think that waiting till university is too late. We actually have a fabulous New Zealand curriculum. It is being refreshed, and it isn't just in science where we're dealing with the climate change issue, but like you say, in English and media studies, talking about how do you interrogate. So you need some really good scientific literacy, but you also need to be able to engage in the debate and be able to really interrogate the evidence.
A reminder that this is a quick fire round.
Sorry, he started it.
Yeah, he did.
My fault, I'm sorry.
Penny, yes or no to the climate change paper?
No, because I think the fastest way to turn people off something is to make it mandatory.
Chris?
No, I think once people students get to university, they're old enough to have opinions already.
And finally, Andy?
Yeah, we would also say no.
Right.
I think one thing I would say on that is just to say, just imagine if it was compulsory and you failed it. It was the one thing that was stopping you getting your degree. Now, I'm not sure that was very popular.
Right, we'll just keep on the quick fire for a little bit. Does it matter that languages are taught at university? Yes or no, Andy?
Yes. Yeah, languages are I mean, we've just had the conversation about te reo. It's absolutely vital in our country. Whether it should be compulsory or not, obviously we have a bit of a disagreement. But languages are a real core part of...
What about German and things like that?
Well, I mean, I learned a little bit of German at this university as well. That was my choice to do that. I enjoyed it. I used it when I went overseas as well. I think language is a really, really important part of cultures, and I think people should have that opportunity to be able to learn languages.
Thank you. Chris?
Yes, yeah, if the demand is there, absolutely.
Penny?
Yes, but do we have to have them at every university? Possibly not.
Angela, do you think
Yes.
German should be taught here?
Well, I think languages should be accessible at every university, yes.
Tiana?
When I was at high school, I did calculus and I did statistics and physics and stuff like that, and I dropped French. I haven't used calculus and all that other kind of stuff, but I ended up living in France for a couple of years, and that French would have come in real handy if I'd continued to do that. Like languages, they are the windows to other perspectives. They are the windows to other worlds. I think we should celebrate our humanities, celebrate our languages. Being bilingual is awesome, but being multilingual is even more awesome.
Yeah.
Just sticking with this theme a little bit, phonics or whole languages, Tiana?
I have not thought about this one at all. So she has though.
Okay, so you've wimped out of this.
I'm wimping out. I'm going for the union thug.
Obviously, it's not a binary conversation.
That's the words I was looking for.
When you are teaching anyone to read, whether it is a child or an adult, whoever, and you consider their learning challenges and all the rest and the world that they come from, you have a kite that has a range of strategies. There is better practice, which we are starting to roll out in schools. And so it isn't a binary, it isn't either, actually. It's them plus. And, yeah.
Okay. Penny, is that going to be a bit confusing for teachers?
Yes, I think it is, and I think that teachers need to be given better resources. I think our curriculum has left things too open, and that's been difficult, particularly for young teachers. I think we need to have much better resources and a tighter curriculum to assist. I do trust them, but I think they need more resources, more support.
Great, so you'll be so stoked to vote for us and make sure that we continue with
I
the
won't,
rolling out
Angela.
of the better practice model, evidence-informed, developed at the University of Canterbury, the resources for teachers and significant professional development to support them, because for a few years there they were only talking about national standards.
Thank you. Chris?
Again, it should be evidence-based, and it should be a choice of a school principal and the school board as to how they deliver that. And the number of students that they get who parents want them to learn like that will.
Well, we couldn't have surely parents nominating. What happens if you'd have to have two teachers in the classroom?
Well, no, if they knew that one school focused on one style, then and they didn't like it, they'd go somewhere else.
Unless you're in a rural community and you've got no choice.
Well, okay. We'll just get Andy's
for 22 years.
We'll just get Andy's view on phonics.
Thanh you. My students disagree.
I don't know the answer. I don't know which of the two of them is better, some of them might be better for different students as well. I would make the point though that sometimes being able to go from one school to another school is not that easy. Most of our schools here, certainly at primary level, I think in the area which I previously represented, every single one bar one was zoned. So that's slightly problematic, saying I don't like the way that this school teaches, but I then want to go to the next school that is full, and then I want to go. It just doesn't work. So I think there's a challenge there.
Right, we're going to take some audience questions shortly, but I want to have one final quickfire question with you here. You've all done tertiary study. What was the most important thing you learned during that study? Starting with you, Andy.
I think probably it's the way to be able to research things, to compile a set of evidence, and then to make an argument, to weigh up the issues that on each side, and then to come to an argument. So it's not about a particular subject. It's more about being able to compile all the evidence, weigh that evidence up, and then make a decision, which is exactly the way that politics ought to work, rather than make the decision before you've weighed up the evidence.
Thank you. Chris?
It's a tricky one. I think I realised that academic work is really tough. Prior to coming to university, I was scrub cutting in the bush, and actually sitting up all night trying to get an essay done was just as tough.
I think working in teams, being able to deal with the project together and realise people have different strengths and allocating different strengths in different parts of projects. So just realising that you could come together as a team and do something really special.
Thank you.
I guess I learned how powerful learning is and how powerful it can be to be curious and ask good questions.
You should have been a journalist. Tiano.
Good question. When I went to university, one of my lecturers was Ranginui Walker, so that was the first time I was learning about Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the land wars and all this kind of stuff. 18-year-old me hadn't learned any of that stuff in high school. They didn't teach us any of that kind of stuff. And the other person who I learned a lot from was Jeanette Fitzsimons. I enrolled in an environmental science paper, and she was our lecturer, and that's where I first learned about like global warming and climate change and the impacts of deforestation and why it's so important for us to have healthy oceans and those kinds of things. So it's those kinds of great minds and being able to access those people and their knowledge, which was, I guess, a beginning of a lifelong journey of not just learning but also action. Because once you learn the ideas, once I learned from these people, it's like, well, okay, now that I know that, I should do something about it. So the way that that kind of shaped my whole life's journey was really important. So,
Thank you very much. Right, we've got a whole list of questions from the audience, but I'm going to just, because we're running a bit short of time now, I'm just going to pick out a few. And the first one I'm going to ask is from Bronwyn Wood. She's an education lecturer, and she says, recent data is showing high school students are selecting lightweight credits and avoiding subjects perceived to be difficult. Is it time to reform NCEA? I'm going to start in the middle with you, Penny.
Yeah, I think that we've seen, particularly in this last year, where retention rates have been particularly low in the first year at university, that our school leavers are not particularly well prepared for tertiary education. So, yeah, look, I do think we will have to have a look at NCA and whether it is fit for purpose, and particularly whether it's fit for purpose for preparing people for tertiary.
Chris, too many people taking lightweight subjects?
Yeah, I do think that has become an issue, and the NCEA certainly needs to be looked at. One of ACT's proposals in its policies is to get rid of NCEA level 3 and put university entrance as the level 3 year 13 qualification. So addressing that very thing you're talking about.
Tiano?
Two things. I'd like to know what lightweight means. Not all students are the same. Not everybody wants to come to the university.
Media studies is one for you.
You've done so well, so maybe people should take that. So there's that concern as well, making sure we have the diversity of subjects, so that the students can step into whatever career pathway is good for them. But also I'm worried about churn. So whenever we have, when you refresh the system, then a new government comes on and they want to refresh the refresh, and then refresh the refresh, that creates so much churn in the system. If you're going to do changes like this, it's got to be timed well, because what happens is it draws all the resources out of the system, and curriculum experts don't grow on trees. Like if you're getting people to focus on particular things, then all of a sudden new group comes on and they want to refresh it. That means all of that previous work is going to have to be redone, and then it's probably going to be done by those same people. It takes up a lot of time and a lot of resources when we actually need to be focusing on some other issues. So, you always need to take a look at the system and review things, but also timeliness is also, I think, an important factor.
Yep. Angela, there was some discussion before about the need to, I think from Penny, to focus a bit more on STEM subjects. What's your view around this issue?
Are you talking about STEM or NCA or both?
Well, I guess these lightweight subjects, if we go back
okay.
to...
Tell us what lightweight is.
Okay. So I've been teaching, I just need to shout out to my former students who are students of Victoria. So some of them do make it, just saying. You know who you are. I've been around long enough that I've taught 3 lots of qualifications in this country, and NCA is in the middle of a refresh at the moment, and that is a response to equity of access for students, but it's also about, I think the idea behind the original NCA was about giving parity across knowledge and skills. It didn't matter if it was around, and parity being quite rigorous around whether it's dance or physics, right? I used to have this argument with my head of science about, he says, oh my goodness, how can you get 6 credits for dance at level 3 when my students are getting them in physics? And I said, well, you go and devise a 3-minute piece on grief, darling. So that was a really rigorous process that we went through. An interesting thing happened when our previous government required an 85% pass rate at level 2, and it incentivised some really interesting behaviour, and that there was a whole pile of credit farming because we were told it didn't matter what kids were coming out with, they just needed 85 credit, they needed 85% pass, they just needed to pass. So there was a whole pile of unit standards that hadn't gone through that rigour of parity, and so you did have kids going off in the holidays and getting 20 credits in a unit standards course and coming back and I go, right, we're going to do a manifesto policy, it's going to, you know, at level 2 economics around housing, and it's going to take us most of the term, and it's only 6 credits, and the kids are going, forget it. So that is a hangover from the 85% requirement. So, and one other problem, of course, when we were seeking to give parity to other knowledge and skills, was that we lost the requirement to be able to be literate and numerate as well. And we need both. We need you to be able to demonstrate your knowledge and skills through creating a piece of theatre or conducting a science experiment, but we also need you to be literate. So removing the barriers to demonstrating knowledge and skills on one hand lost us lit, and that's coming back.
Mark, I think we can't ignore the fact that a lot of our secondary schools are going to alternate qualifications, baccalaureate qualifications,
Yes,
and
they are.
particularly our biggest school, secondary school is, so we can't ignore that. We have to look at why they are shifting.
That's why we're refreshing NCA.
Andy?
Yeah, look, there's certainly some occasions when people will say, look, this one looks harder than this one, so I'll go for the easy one. But I think the key thing there is that we've got a real diversity of different opportunities through the NCA program at the moment. And absolutely, we would say you've got to do you've got to do those core basics. You've got to have the skill there, because if you don't have those skills, it's going to be very, very hard. Whether you're going to tertiary education or whether you're going into the workforce, whatever, you need those core skills. But we also need to make sure that the education system is flexible enough to allow people to train and to learn about the things that actually interest them and that work for them. We are not, every one of us is different. We all have different aspirations, we all have different skills, and the education system should work for us. And to the extent that it doesn't, and I gave the illustration before, if you've got some learning challenges, the system at the moment doesn't work. So it needs to be more flexible. So I certainly would say support doing a review. Chucking things out holus bolus is going to be a problem, but certainly reviewing it so we try and make sure that it works, because what we do want is we want our young people to be able to say, I've been through the compulsory education sector and I come out with something, and I feel like I've achieved something, because that's really, really important.
Thank you, Andy. Right, we're going to closing statements now, and what I would like you to address is this. You're the Education Minister in the next government.
Woohoo!
You're so optimistic. Thank you.
What will be your 2 top priorities and why? But you only have a minute each, starting with you, Tiana.
Kia ora. Well, my 2 top priorities would be rent controls and an income guarantee so that students don't live in poverty and hardship, and that will make it easier for them to come to institutions like that. I've done that in 10 seconds. There you go. Kia ora. Tari Vote Green.
Thank you. Penny Simons.
Simmons.
Sorry.
fixing the vocational education sector. It's just such a mess. We're losing valuable staff out of it, and we are losing our liaison with industry, and so we've got to get that back on track. 200 million has been wasted already, another billion is being signalled to be wasted on it over the next decade. We just can't allow that to continue happening, so that's going to have to be the first priority.
Do you have a second priority?
The second priority really is having a look at the university system and just seeing whether there is areas where we perhaps should be rationalising, areas to make sure that we don't lose our capacity anywhere in the sector, but that we aren't trying to replicate things with very small numbers.
Chris, your two top priorities?
Two top priorities would be having a really good look at the current Ministry of Education and making sure those extra, well, there were 2,500, there are now over 4,000 people working there, making sure that that is actually good bang for buck and sorting that out. The second thing would be reintroducing partnership schools to help those the inequity that is going on in a lot of our society.
I was hoping you were going to say trumpet lessons, mate.
Oh, that too. Yeah.
Angela, your two top priorities?
Yeah, one of them is really boring. It's finish the stuff that we started. It's been really crunchy work. Collaboration's really time consuming and it's messy. We need to finish curriculum refresh, the NCEA reforms, Rove. We need to get on with the review that we've announced for tertiary funding. So that's the first thing, is finish stuff and embed it, because teachers and tertiary and right through to early childhood they've sucked up so much change, and we need to embed it and see it through. That's the first bit. The second thing for me, I think we really need to prioritise teacher development. So those who are in classrooms, we know that we need to support them to continue to improve their ability to respond to the greater number of diverse students with different challenges, and support them to be better, because we all want to be better teachers. There's room for improvement to support them, and teacher training as well. I think we need to make sure that we're able to respond, teachers are able to respond to their students and supported to do that.
Thank you, Angela. And
I haven't talked to the minister about that one.
And Andy, if Winston Peters holds the balance of power on election night and you're swept in and made Minister of Education, what are your two top priorities?
Education wasn't one of the ones that I put down on my list, but never mind. Look, I think the two key things, the first one of them is to try to make sure that in the compulsory education sector, so primary and secondary school, A, that our children are at school, and B, that they're learning the things that they need to learn so that they come out of school equipped to be able to take on, whether it's tertiary education or going into the workforce, whatever it might be. And at the moment, it's quite clear that far, far too many of our children are being left behind, and we can't afford that. They are our future, but they're also their future. And it's just, there is no way that we can afford to let people behind. So we want to make sure that everybody is looked after in that way. I think the second one probably is the one that we touched on at the beginning, which is the university model and whether it's right for our country at the moment. And I think it's clearly, we've clearly had the discussion that it is somewhat broken. So looking at that, how we fix that, and that's both the, if you like, the teaching part of it, but also the research part, which is critically important to our country going forward as well.
Thank you very much. That's the end of tonight's debate. Congratulations to you all for doing a great job.
Well done.
Right, Winnie and Jessica, were you going to come and say anything? Oh.
I think they're giving us farewell.
Kia ora tātou, my name is Jess. I'm the president of VUSA Te Aotearoa this year. Thank you, candidates and staff and student community, for coming out tonight for a very spirited and great debate. And it's fantastic that there's so many of us here today. With the questions and reactions that we have been seeing from our crowd tonight, I hope all the candidates today understand the severity of the issues that education is currently facing in Aotearoa. And we hope that if elected, you take these issues extremely seriously. And whilst education typically isn't the hottest election topic because of its long timescales in the face of a 3-year election cycle, it doesn't make education any less important. Education is about our long-term future. And tonight we've spent a lot of time hearing the candidates talk, some of it being the usual rhetoric, some of it more valuable and insightful. But we must remember that tonight is not really about the candidates, it is about us, the staff and student community here today. The future of education is not something that we have no agency in. It is not up to the few people on stage today to determine this for us, and we must uninternalize any helplessness that we feel and act with power. And we are the ones who have the power to determine this future of education in Aotearoa with our votes, our kōrero with others, and other forms of democratic engagement, notably the power of education that all our educators here today understand and that transformational impact it has on students. And as voters, we get to decide who we entrust with the weight of students' futures, the health of our institutions, and the future of Aotearoa. We have a higher education funding review on the way to ensure the funding model can become sustainable and serve us all. And we all agree education is the backbone of the society. This review and this long-term future of our country cannot be used as a political football, and it will require our politicians to work together.
Good.
So we expect you all to not just electioneer for our votes in this season, but live up to a genuine commitment to education, to everyone here today. We desire a future where education is financially accessible, where institutions are well funded to provide students with an education that not only shapes individuals, but caring communities concerned with contributing to the common good. So if you're elected, we urge you to stand shoulder to shoulder with us on the ground and to stand up for education alongside us. Thank you, candidates, for making time today, and to everyone else here for showing up, showing people power for education. Voting opens on the 2nd of October until the 14th of October, and there's also going to be a voting booth right behind me here on campus. And I will now hand it over to Assistant Vice Chancellor Pacifica, Honourable Lumanaval Dame Willie Levin, who is going to officially close the debate.
Well done.
Kia ora koutou, kia ora ana koutou katoa toa, talofa lava, and very warm Pacific greetings to you all. It is my pleasure to thank our MC Mark Jennings for refereeing this debate. Whawhetai tele lava Mark. And thank you to the candidates. Chris Bailey from the ACT Party, Te Ano Tuiono from the Green Party, Angela Roberts from Labour, Penny Simmons from National, and Andy Foster from New Zealand First. Thank you all for your spirited contributions to the debate. Putting yourself forward for political office takes courage. Wide and active political participation is important and necessary for a healthy democracy. Democracy is fragile in this age of misinformation, disinformation, and 24-hour-a-day social media scrutiny. This has been a robust and interesting discussion. I hope that this debate has helped participants and the audience of our voters to clarify their views and will lead to well-informed policies to ensure a strong future for tertiary education, our universities in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Thank you all and good luck. I also wanted to thank the Chancellor, the Vice-Chancellor, staff and students of Te Herenga Waka, Victoria University of Wellington. We have all been going through a very challenging time, and we need to maintain a dialogue with government and opposition, members of Parliament, to ensure that our views are part of political discussions around the future of tertiary education and our university. One thing we can all do is vote in the general election and have our say on who best represents us. Representatives from the Electoral Commission are here if anyone wants to enrol or has questions about enrolment. Finally, a big thank you to the organisers of the 2023 election debate. the future of education in Aotearoa New Zealand. Thank you, whawhetei tele lava. Travel home safely.